Good afternoon to all of you. This is Erfan Ibrahim, and this is the April seminar for the Smart Grid Educational Series. I am delighted to be here at Underwriters Laboratories in Fremont, California. We have a group of very enthusiastic people from the Bay Area who have joined us, and I can safely say from both sides of the Bay. And Fremont is a very nice central location that allows people to come in from different parts of the Bay Area easily. So I really appreciate everyone's time today as they have come and become part of this town hall meeting. Now, the town hall meeting idea I came up with when I found out that John couldn't be here in person because so many people had planned on being here to meet with him, and I didn't want to disappoint them in any way. And I felt that this would be a good opportunity for us to talk about something which has become a very serious subject, and people in different stakeholder groups of the electric sector are discussing it. There is a paper that has been posted on the Edison Electric Institute website. It's been there for a little while, and some of you have read it. I pointed it out as a basis for having a discussion. Now, this is a high-tech town hall meeting, so the aim is to get those of you who are online involved. And for the people here, I'm going to ask them, as they have something to say, to come close to the speaker here. You will be able to hear from this speaker that you see in front of us. So you'll hear very clearly if someone speaks, but mostly you can see stuff online. So I guess we'll just have to move this over. 1 second. We're going to move the computer so that they can watch the overhead slides. Yes. No, you're fine. Yeah. We're just connecting the screen so that people here in the room can watch also. Just bear with us for a minute, and we'll get started. Okay, great. So what I wanted to do was first start by providing you an agenda for today. So we're starting with the town hall meeting, and then we're going to have a talk by John Teeter on the Green Button Initiative for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we will have the Q&A session, and then we'll adjourn at 2 p.m. Pacific. I wanted to first start by doing a dedication of this event. Vesna Heinze, who was married to Matthias Heinze, has passed away, and her death occurred a few weeks ago. And the irony of the situation is that the last seminar we had was at TUV Rhineland, and Matthias was hosting it in Pleasanton. And then a couple weeks later, I heard about her passing, and I attended her funeral in Oakland. The reason why I dedicated this presentation to Vesna is that she has done a lot in her 46 years. She founded this organization called Solar for Peace, which is a nonprofit organization and is looking at ways of bringing solar power to underprivileged people so that they have a source of energy to improve their quality of life. And for many third world countries that are not served adequately by the national grid, I don't mean the company national grid, but their national grid, that having something like solar power would mean not buying diesel fuel or not relying on the propane gas, which a lot of times the supply is not very reliable or it's very expensive. And it's the equivalent of what cellular telephony did to these developing countries. They moved them from the 19th century to the 21st century by just putting some towers and quickly giving them access. And so Vesna did a lot of work as she traveled around the world and she looked at the needs of people in developing countries. She was able to put this organization together, and I would encourage you to go to this website, solarforpeace.org. She was a philanthropist, a world traveler, an educator, a real family inspiration. So this is why I would like this presentation to be dedicated in memory to Vesna Heinze. Now let's move to our town hall meeting. The paper that was put on the EEI website spoke about some of the challenges that the traditional utilities are going to face going forward. And that challenge is mostly posed by the changing economic times and also the advent of some cutting-edge technologies that are giving customers choice where previously that was not possible, either because the price points were too high or the communication technology wasn't there or the business process wasn't there to engage those customers. So the theme of the town hall meeting today was about customer engagement, distributed energy resources, and the changing utility business model. All of these are variables, and when we say variables, that means they are subject to change. New technologies come that change the scene of how electricity is produced, transmitted, and distributed and consumed. We're seeing those changes. The advent of microgrids, the advent of community storage, all of those things are creating new business models. At the same time, there's deregulation occurring, which is allowing more competition to exist in different parts of the country. The most extreme example of that is in the state of Texas, where every little part of it is deregulated. And you could have multiple service providers in a particular area. Now, granted, the wire in the last mile will belong to some company that's going to deliver it, but that doesn't mean that the smart meter belongs to them or the informatics around it belongs to them. So there are many, many players that could come into this. So the traditional vertically integrated utility that has the generation, the transmission, the distribution part all within one company now has to be in at least different business units. They're not allowed to talk to each other. And now when you have distributed energy resources with independent power producers coming into the mix, and there are people, energy service companies like Enernoc and Converge and Tendril and others who are providing services to customers, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial. There are many variables now, and it's become a very complex market. So traditional utilities that offered investors a very reliable place to invest their money, the returns were not very high, but they were assured. So they were able to get capital for much lower cost than some startup company or someone that doesn't have the track record. So that was the old paradigm. So what happened? Utilities would take advantage of that low-cost capital and build stuff, lots of stuff. I mean, if we think about it, we have over 1,000 gigawatt capacity in this country. That's a lot of power plants. And then you think all that power goes through transmission substations and then gets out there into distribution substations and out. There's a lot of infrastructure to carry this kind of power. But that's changing. We're finding increasingly, I mean, in the last year, renewable energy constituted 50% of the growth in capacity. Now, granted, some of it is hydro, but it's going to be small. Mostly, it's solar and wind and biofuels and other things. And this is going to happen more and more. So keep these paradigm shifts in mind And what I'd like us to do is discuss how can we create, first of all, is there an existentialist threat, or is there a lot of hype in this argument that if utilities don't respond right away, they're going to go away like dinosaurs or something like that? So first, I want some feedback on this proposition that somehow there's an existentialist threat. And the second one, maybe Chris Villarreal here can help us in his unofficial capacity, not officially representing anything. But Chris always has an opinion on these things. Are there some changes that we could do in the regulatory framework that would help reduce the contention that currently people are anticipating is going to happen when all of these entities try to interact? I'm talking customers who are really now prosumers, independent power producers who have solar farms, wind farms, big storage units, and then the traditional utility. How are they going to peacefully coexist? So my hope through this town hall meeting is I hope that I have bothered you in some way and challenged you in some way so that you will speak up. And all of this is being recorded for a good reason so that we can go back to it and review what the various people have said. All right, so with that, what I'd like to do is if there are people who want to make a point here in the room, if you could come up to the front and speak, because then the people in the audience can hear. And then if there are questions online or issues, put it in the chat window and we'll read it out and we'll talk about it. So let's start with Joe Hughes. Joe?
Is that the mic there?
You can just speak into the phone.
Yeah, Erfan, thanks for the topic. I thought it might be good to just kick off with a little bit of a historical context. When I joined PG&E back in the 70s, energy efficiency, at the time they called it energy conservation, and for the folks that were not familiar with physics. It kicked in many of these discussions, if you will, about rate structures. This energy efficiency create this need for taking a look at a company now going out and asking people to use less of what they sell, basically. So there's been an interesting history on the topic of your existentialist threat, if you will, right from the start, I'd say back from the 70s. And this has led to a number of books written on the topic of rate structures related to energy efficiency. I think to a lesser extent, just due to the penetration, a lot of this reflects on DER too. So that's just kind of an introduction to the fact that I believe both regulators and utilities alike have been wrestling with some of these issues around, because the utilities being the largest, most capital intensive of the utility industries, have a real concern about their investment and covering fixed costs with units of sale. And if those units of sale are dropping, of course, the per unit cost has to rise. The other issue, of course, is the one of load, encouraging people to reduce energy use during peak loads, which saves on capital investment. And that's been an age-old topic as well, going back to the early days of time-of-use pricing with, I know, the California utilities, that goes back to the 70s, time of use, and more recently, real-time pricing. So there has been work already in this area, and no easy answers. I think it's an ongoing challenge, and it's certainly a stimulating topic. So let me stop there.
Okay.
Just as a starter.
Very good. Other people in the room, if you don't want to be identified, that's okay. Your opinion matters more than your identity. So, all right, we'll have Bob. Since Bob is in academia, I can identify him. It's Robert Cormia from Foothill College. Foothill is doing a lot of work in smart energy. They have an active program in building a microgrid on campus. I believe up to 1 megawatt of solar?
1.5.
1.5 megawatt of solar. So no parking lot is safe at Foothill College from a solar panel. And they have microturbine generators. I believe there's also a fuel cell.
We have 250 kilowatts of cogeneration, and we're in discussions about where and when we might put a fuel cell in. Probably a little bit before that or similar timing, we're looking at energy storage.
Right.
So I want to build on something that Erfan mentioned, a term that he used, and I spoke about this at PG&E. He used the term microgrid, and I think microgrid is an accurate term that people use to really describe not just the prosumers, but people who generate enough energy that they can begin to generate, manage their own destiny. So I often use the term managed grid, and I spoke about going from a microgrid to a managed grid. The only difference there, and it's very subtle, is that we would never detach from the mother grid, from the mothership. Because frankly, our business is education, it's not power systems. I'm not sure we'd know how to do this. But in building a good managed grid, you have to do everything to take in the components of a microgrid. And two things to speak on there is that the grid will always be relevant in our opinion, because we need a place to inject our excess energy when we're overproducing, as well as to be able to take it back. We need opportunities to buy power through direct access. And just as importantly, we're interested in carbon in terms of our carbon intensity, so buying energy at particular amounts of time. So from that perspective, the IDSM, the integrated demand side management model, is very important to us. And for us to be a good prosumer, we need to bring in those components of generation and very careful management of our energy profile so that we can do load shifting, load shaping. We're the largest producer of power in Los Altos Hills. We're also the largest consumer of power in Los Altos Hills. We have an obligation as a government entity to invest in new technology, and so we want to buy forward in energy storage. I want to wrap up real quickly and say that in addition to IDSM, where we have distributed generation, demand response, and energy storage, the larger issue here, which is building the emerging electron economy. And we're doing that right now. And utilities have a struggle, and that regulation keeps them kind of hemmed into older models that existed when we had generation, transmission, and distribution. And now we're following different models of not only building from the inside out, but taking GE Imagination's philosophy, clean generation, smart distribution, and efficient end use. Working collaboratively all together so that we can build this active, intelligent grid, including our own customer engagement. I think that's all I wanted to say, other than this is an extremely important topic, and we need to facilitate the evolution of utilities. We don't want to blame them or hold or make them hamstrung in their evolution, just as we don't want to be hamstrung in our building of these managed grids.
Great. Thanks, Bob. We have Paul Heitman, who has put a comment. I'm going to read it. Existential threat starts with the first PUC denied rate case for raising rates based on lost load to DER. The crisis thus starts when Wall Street immediately revalues the entire sector with a plus 3% risk premium, which gives 30% haircut to their stock value. I like the choice of words. I'm going to comment on it in just a minute when I gather my wits about me after that statement. But the next one is panic and intensified lobbying ensues. Okay. Thank you, Paul. So these are the kinds of things that the author of the white paper that EEI has posted on their website was talking about, that there is some kind of a precipice. There is a point of no return, kind of like the way we talk about climate change and the content of carbon in the air, that there will come a point where the storms and the hurricanes and all of these things will be too often for us to be able to do anything about them. So the question is, how do we evaluate these assertions? How much weight do we give them? And how do we help the utility industry that is providing a life-supporting service to society? We cannot underestimate that value, just the same way we can't underestimate the value of an ambulance or 911 or fire brigade or the police department. As inefficient as those organizations are, but society pays a price in order for that service to be available when we really need it. So the question is, how do the traditional utilities get modified over time so that they can continue to play this important role while allowing other creative entities who also want to make a living in this business to be able to do so? Because after all, we claim that we're living in a free market. And the irony is that deregulation started a process. And now, you know, what Paul is talking about are some of the consequences of that process. So are there views here in the room that you'd like to share about how serious is this problem? Or is there mostly hype for the purpose of business development of people who want to then tell people what to do? I really want this town hall meeting to be one where you express yourself. If you don't want to be identified, that's fine. Just raise your hand and come and say what you need to say. People may use a voice recorder and say, oh, that's so-and-so. I can recognize. I did the Fourier analysis on his voice. But I really feel that we need to have an open discussion on this because of how important this subject is. My personal opinion is that there is enough room for everyone to play. This is a huge economy. All we need to do is figure out some rules of engagement, of how the various entities need to work with each other, rather than build barriers. So I think the biggest barrier is human communication and building consensus around business models that create a win-win-win situation. When I say win-win-win, I'm talking about all three major players, the utilities, the prosumers, and the IPPs. You can't resist. An unidentified individual is going to express his opinion, and they will be just his opinion and not the organization that he represents.
That is correct.
This is, I am a public person. I'm Chris Filler out of the California PUC. Of course, as Erfan was jokingly hinting, these are, of course, my opinions, because the PUC does not necessarily have an opinion on this. That being said, I will agree and echo something that the PUC President Mike Peavy said last summer at the NARED summer meetings in Denver, that this question is a lot of hype. The utility industry has faced this over and over every so often, and each time the utility still survive. In my opinion, the utility would, of course, survive, because much as the professor or lecturer from Foothill said, we will always have a need for utility. Someone has to be out there to manage the grid, to take power in from the customer and transmit power from the utility side. So what really needs to be changed is, as I think the question that we received, is that there needs to be a change in culture at the utility as well as at the regulatory, as well as on the regulatory side, to allow for the utility to innovate, to handle innovation going on the customer side, to handle innovation going on outside of the utility services model. Which leads to, my opinion that we do need to think of this more as a services model interface as opposed to utility selling simply the commodity. Moving to a services model interface allows the utility to maintain its role as a distribution company. The utility becomes the distribution system operator, much the same way that many areas of the country have an independent system operator managing the transmission side or the bulk power side. In that manner, the utility can handle and, with the PUC's help, develop and draft tariffs and interconnection agreements where services can be sold directly to the utility, where the utility needs those services to be had on the distribution side. Be that the development of LMP pricing at the distribution side or not, the utility now has to manage the grid. The utility has to handle the power coming up and the power going out. And having the appropriate services that the utility needs to procure thinking ancillary services, for example, would allow the utility to actually price some of the things that they will need. So that being said, utilities and regulators need to, understand that the grid is becoming more volatile. The policies that are being pushed down onto the distribution grid, such as net energy metering, greater solar development, aggregation demand response, makes the provision of electricity as well as the ability to recover infrastructure revenue a lot riskier. And we need to accept that. We need to accept that the utility investments will become riskier. We need to encourage utilities to take more risk. If you think about it, that we have a rate case that is every 3 years. When in reality, it's not 3 years, it's a 5-year rate case cycle. Utilities come in on day one with their rate case, which is required to be cost effective, which means they're using technology that is old already. And when finally approved and finally invested and rolled out, that's at least 5 years from now. That does no one any good if we want to have such a robust, volatile, and highly innovative distribution side, customer side investment. So allowing utilities to invest in things that may have a slightly riskier payback, that may fail. I think we can't be afraid of failure. We need to allow utilities to fail to get some lessons learned, because that's where we learn the most, is through failures, not through our success. And so allowing and thinking more of a culture change, not an existential change, is what's really going to have to drive the discussion between utilities, regulators, third parties, people on the customer side, data analytic providers. Everyone that wants to get involved in the grid needs to come to an understanding of what this new culture is going to look like, and not necessarily whether the utility will be around in 5 years or not.
Great. Thank you, Chris. We have a couple of ideas online that I'm going to read. One of them is from Stephen Northover, who says, "This is an opportunity. Why not lease utility-built microgrids to private owners?" Now, here is a very good economies of scale proposal, because you can use the business structure of the utility and the balance sheet, essentially, to get that cheap money, at low cost. Invest in those microgrids, but then let other entities manage it, run it, produce the electricity, and sell it. So this type of model exists in a lot of developing countries, where you will have foundations who will have the money, and they will set up some infrastructure that young entrepreneurs, small businesses can come in and run. So here's a hybrid type model that he's proposing, that why shouldn't utilities play in this space? Now, there is precedent for this. If you look in the medical industry, in the health industry, you see that a lot of the chemical-based companies, when they saw biotech startups coming up, what did they do? They let them fail. Some succeeded, and when they reached a certain level, they started buying them out. And they created a biotech division within their chemical-based company. You see that with Roche. Roche did that with Genentech, and you see other players like that. So here's an example, if you want to take the business analogy here, that if you think of utilities like those chemical-based companies, and the biotechs like the distributed energy resource type people, they could very well be part of that business model. But that requires decisions in these large utilities at the highest level. This cannot be the discussion of some mid-level manager guy or some technology connoisseur within the utility. It really has to be part of the strategic direction of the utility, with their board, with their investors, come up with these decisions. So I'm really glad that, Chris, you have expressed your personal opinion on the subject. And I think some of it has to do with your zip code, because you are in an area where people take risks and do well. So you know the success stories. There are others in other parts of the country who think risk is just a bad thing. When something is a sure think, why go for risk? Well, all growth, ask any butterfly how risky it is to become one, but then how beautiful it is. Can you imagine if the cocoon, the larva decided not to become a cocoon and the cocoon decided not to become a butterfly? We just have a lot of larvae running around or sitting around. So change comes with risk, but so does growth. And we need to embrace that. So this part of this may be more about a mental model, kind of like the way physicists had mental models about ether and couldn't come up with the photoelectric effect because they never believed there could be such a thing as vacuum. So we are doing something similar here, and this will be changing the way we look at the electric industry is if the 100 or so large utilities start embracing these future business models. All right, so we have John Peter, who says, opinion. The regulators are leading the industry in the direction of slow, measured transformation with value being brought, as Chris indicates, for innovation, resiliency, engagement of the consumer base. Okay? And then Paul, I guess, provides a little bit of a response after Chris spoke. It says, I feel that the answer lies in having the wires company offer their conductors, wires, for access and use, wire capacity for power flow in both directions. Services model is right on target, and utilities should have to take on risk if they want to be any more than that. Okay, so here is an example. We learned this from the telephony industry, right? We had AT&T, the big monopoly, and then in 1982 there was a Judge Green, I guess, and then he had a decision that broke the utilities up. There were some 23 regional Bell operating companies that came out of it, and then they held on their turf for a while until they couldn't, and they had to even compete in the local market. So finally what happened? Those same companies reformulated themselves, and in many cases were just providing access in the last mile, and they were charging for that wire because that was their investment. And there was no other way to get in until the game-changing cellular technology kicked in. And now even that is not necessary. So they got into other things like entertainment and internet service and so on. So we have examples out there that exist. But I would like to say that we should not look at it in terms of an existentialist threat. I think that argument is fallacious. We should be looking at ways of making electricity more affordable, safe, and reliable for more customers as we go forward in time. And we should not forget that they are the final arbiters, the people who generate gross domestic product from receiving these electrons. They should be the final arbiter, not the entities that provide it or the ones who generate it. And so somehow, if we put the horse before the cart, then everything will work out fine. The problem is that entities have become so big that they say we can't fail. Kind of like we saw that in the aviation industry, or you saw that in the automobile industry, where they said we're so big we can't fail. So I think that those kinds of arguments are not good, because anytime you say you're too big to fail, you will, because you're not innovating, you're not changing with the time. So I think that we definitely have a serious topic here, and the nice thing is that I'm watching about 15, 20 people enjoying a wonderful lunch, so they're all receiving energy as we speak. It's chemical energy, but it can be converted, hopefully, into verbal energy very soon. So for those of you who are online, I'd like to hear some more of your thoughts, some views on these three things. So on the existentialist argument, on what needs to occur in terms of regulatory changes, And are there business models available? So we saw some suggestions of maybe microgrids being rolled out by utilities and having third parties run them, produce electricity, and give some return on the investment to the utilities. Other thoughts, views? Well, you have to come here because it's the only way out is through this phone here, and it's difficult to reach. It's okay. Go ahead, Bob.
Back again. Excuse me. I just wanted to comment that Foothill Ganz's new educational center being built at the former Onizuka Air Force Base is intended to be a zero-net energy site. It will be a 50,000 square foot building operating at between 1.5 to 2 watts. So we'll draw about 100 kW worth of power when we're at cruising altitude, so to speak. And to be zero-net energy, we need to put somewhere between 250 to 500 kW kilowatts of solar photovoltaics in the parking lot. And when I draw this for my class, it's more than a tsunami coming in. We're producing 2 to 3 to 4 times as much energy in an afternoon as we actually use, and then it goes to nothing. We have to draw power back. From a physics model, and this is my opinion, not Foothill Kansas College's opinion, I can't really make sense of creating so much energy and just throwing it all the way out and then drawing it slowly back. If we could have affordable energy storage, we would certainly do that. But again, to use the power grid, not as a battery, but as a bank for debits and credits might make sense. You really need a lot of distributed intelligence to understand what those power flows look like. So you can, as a utility, and I really like the suggestion of a distribution operator who can manage those flows and really choreograph what this utility looks like. So to my point, we're looking at zero-net energy as a requirement for new homes starting in 2020, 50% of all buildings in 2025, all commercial buildings, new buildings in 2030. It's hard to imagine really how this happens when we're pushing so much energy back and forth. It really requires a lot of forward thought on how to make a grid work and how to make a utility work. And so with respect to that, I can understand that the utility has some resistance with net energy metering, having these enormous power flows going back and forth. The grid simply wasn't designed for that. So on the one hand, in California, if we really want to go forward with zero-net energy, we really have to go forward with asking, what does this future power grid, what does it look like, and how does it work?
Very good.
Very well stated.
So let's continue this discussion by looking at some of the energy technologies that I consider are game-changing. The solar and wind is obvious. We are seeing a lot of solar installations. The capacity is growing. The price point is coming down on dollars per watt. Wind, a lot of it is being tapped, and the challenge now is how do you get the wind from the places where it exists in abundance to where it's needed, because the transmission lines in certain portions of the country are very congested. Biofuels have their place in the agricultural sector. We're seeing a lot of that with the waste products coming out of farms and how that's being used to make fuel. Electric storage, as EPRI would call it, the dance partner for renewable energy like solar and wind, as Bob was talking about, that if it was available inexpensively, then a lot of their excess energy that they have during the daytime could be stored and used at another time when they don't have that solar power. That doesn't follow Moore's law. Electric storage is a chemistry problem. It's not an IT problem solved on Route 237 in the Silicon Valley. And this is a part a lot of people are just not getting, that there are only so many combinations of elements you can do, and there's only so much enthalpy that you can save and have a material that is safe and reliable. It's not flaky, and I literally mean flaky, like it'll break it up into little pieces or catch fire under stressful conditions, because electric storage units have to deal with all kinds of weather. You could be as cold as Ohio, -40, all the way to 140 in the Mojave Desert. Chemistry has phase changes when you go through 180 degrees of Fahrenheit of temperature change. So we have to keep all of this in mind. We don't have the luxury of nice air-conditioned data centers to keep these batteries. So when you put chemistry with electronics and a business model, then something will work. Then the innovation turns into an invention. So someone in a lab may be able to store a lot of energy in a particular combination of elements, but to bring that to market is a whole different story. And a lot of electric storage companies are unfortunately facing that. So we do have a challenge when it comes to bulk storage. Now, there are other ways of storing energy, not just electric storage, right? There's thermal storage. You can do pre-cooling of buildings. That's a type of thermal storage when you're anticipating a hot day. You have flywheels. People are looking and studying that. There's pumped hydro. I know in the U.S. it's difficult to find places, but in other countries they are looking at that. Then going a little further, fossil fuels have not decided to roll over and play dead yet. They are coming back with a ferocity, and they're talking about going deeper into the planet and finding the natural gas. A lot of times it comes with radon, which is radioactive, but NRC is not regulating that. Interesting. You know, we control the radioactivity of little cesium sources in a hospital, but the radon gas coming out of a fracking system is not controlled by the NRC. I'm finding that a very interesting reality, and it will have implications in the environment. So we need to think about that. But on the electricity production side, there has been a lot of improvement in the efficiency of systems to produce electricity from natural gas and from coal. And if you look at some of the work that EPRI has done in recent years in terms of high temperature materials and essentially improving the Carnot efficiency by raising or increasing the delta between inlet and outlet temperature of a steam turbine, you can get better efficiency. You can also get that from gasifying coal or using gas-cooled reactors, coal plants. So those types of efficiency gains have a huge impact, especially when coal constitutes 51% of the energy produced in the U.S. I guess it's now 48, but it's up there. So every percentage point matters. And so the fossil fuel generation sources are looking for innovative technologies. Carbon capture and sequestration is another area that a lot of countries are looking at as a possibility because coal is so abundant. And if you could capture the carbon, suddenly those aspects of coal are not part of the discussion anymore. The sulfur, mercury, and other things have been scrubbed for years, so that's not an issue. And then small modular nuclear reactors. I know DOE has invested money in this area, and there is research going on. And if you combine that with breeding and reprocessing, then a lot of the issues that we're facing with proliferation with traditional plants, with the plutonium and all of that, if you go to a thorium fuel cycle and you use small modular reactors and highly efficient, you can have them in a subterranean setup. And if you can just go and if you Google small modular reactors, you'll see lots of websites and rich information on this subject. So the reason why I bring this up is that utilities have many options. So they don't have to just play this existentialist game, as they say, of having a smaller and smaller piece of the pie because they just have traditional sources of energy which are becoming less and less popular. They can get into this business, as Chris was saying, make the investment. It may be risky, but it will lead to true technological innovation that will allow them to play in this competitive market. Because if you see the curves for solar and wind and all of these things, they are coming down. And they're coming down not so much because of the chemistry or the design, but of manufacturing and the economies of scale in manufacturing. That's what's bringing it down. So it's what I call a linear offset model. There will be some point where it'll level off, but we're nowhere near that today. And each time the price comes down, it opens new markets. Just like with handheld devices, as the chips got smaller, right? They got lighter, the form factor got smaller, and suddenly a whole new set of applications were possible. So we can see the same kind of innovation in energy also, that as price points come down to a certain point, it makes sense to have a new kind of service provider for energy. All right, so Paul writes, if these are generation technologies only, okay, maybe missing DC grids. Otherwise, you're missing transactive energy as a game changer, which essentially means software and secure low latency communication networks, all coupled with interoperability standards, i.e. SCP 2.0, OpenADR. Yes. So yes, I wasn't talking about virtual power plants, because virtual power plants are also like, and we have Gary Sorkin sitting here in the front row who had a company called Megawatt that was all about virtual power plants, that sometimes in a market, instead of trading megawatts, you want to trade megawatts. And there are some, I believe, energy clearance houses around the country that do accept megawatts and not just megawatts. So this is something we're going to be looking at more and more going forward, is the idea that companies will have some assets which will allow them to save energy at a certain time when the demand is really high, and offer it in the market and generate revenue from it. And in return, they may contact businesses and factories and homes and tell them to shut off their systems. Or maybe they'll have some energy in storage, which they can offer. They can provide VAR support and other ancillary services. So there are many, many ways of making money in this business. Now we have Stephen Northover says, ESP, Energy Service Provider. Okay. And then I'm really enjoying this presentation, but I need to leave. Okay. Yes, it will be available for download and streaming. All of this is being recorded, Melody, so thank you for participating. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask if there are any more questions or comments, either online or here in the room. And then what I'm going to do is bring this town hall meeting to a close. We'll have a 10-minute break, and then we're going to resume again with John Teeter's presentation. So for those of you who are online, you can take a bio break or relax, and it'll allow us to do some administrative things here and get some people who haven't eaten to eat, and then we'll get started at about 35 after the hour.
I think you may have
questions? Okay. So there is one question, I believe, from Alex Abrams. Who will own derived value from the end user information networks now being developed, aka smart meters infrastructure? Is this value only parasitic on power distribution, or is there an independent value here? Example, near ubiquitous business home monitoring. Oh, now we're talking big data, and we're talking analytics, and we're talking about monetization of that business intelligence that you can derive from the big data. I think that there are companies like Cloudera and MapR and Hortonworks that would love it, that we would engage big data in everything to do with electric, just like they're going after the healthcare market and they're going after the telecom market. This is a sweet spot for them. But I think the argument still needs to be made. And part of this has to do with education and awareness. That's how important is energy consumption to Americans that on average pay about 6% of their median income in energy. Now, some markets are stressed, and they're definitely paying more. but on average, it's about 6%. There is no social value that they can really derive except for maybe some middle school kids who brag and say we spend half the energy our neighbors do to their teachers, but it hasn't caught on, like it hasn't become a social value yet. And so if you look at Facebook and Yahoo and all of these other social networking type, Twitter, LinkedIn, or you look at the fad for healthcare or the fad for supplements, GNC stores, it hasn't quite hit the mass market that way. I'm talking about energy information. And Gene Wang is sitting here from People Power, and in 2 weeks he'll be actually speaking with his colleagues on our WebEx session on exactly this, customer engagement and how do you monetize energy information. But I don't see in the short run anything that multi-billion-dollar companies are going to come out of this evaluation. It's going to take some time. It's going to require some education. And it's not just about saving money. That's the argument that needs to be associated with energy information, that it's not just about money. There are other social values. Part of it is climate change. Part of it is avoiding building new capacity and what its social implications are going to be. All of those things are important. It's not just today, you know, when we have subsidies and we get electricity at a certain price, we shouldn't take it for granted. If the market were floated, who knows what the price of electricity is going to be in a free market? We don't know. So we shouldn't just be looking at the present situation and making decisions. But see, this is about education and awareness. All right. So I think,
can I respond to that?
yes, please, come on over. Oh, Paul Heitman says, oh, power. Okay.
Exactly, yes.
And he doesn't mean OH power, he means O power.
So I agree with Paul and Erfan. I'm Gene Wang from People Power, and I will be very honored to be presenting to the group on 24th to talk about consumer engagement. O Power, as I guess Paul said, just went public with $1 billion valuation. What do? They allow utilities to present on their monthly bill after the month is over how people are doing against their neighbors. It's very, very simple, and it's worth $1 billion. Can you imagine the kind of value that can be unlocked by entrepreneurs or utilities in really harnessing that to a much, much deeper level, of doing that deep dive data analytics that Erfan was mentioning? And now I think one of the things that People Power has learned over the years, you know, starting in the clean tech business and realizing, you know, wish I was talking to Erfan a little earlier, but realizing people don't care. Normal people don't care that much. They are not going to go out of their way to save $6 or $10 or, you know, $15 a month. But they do care deeply about, you know, their homes, their kids, their pets, their lifestyle, controlling. And if you can position a service bundle that utilities, who are maybe some of them looking for new service models, new business models, and really trying to, for the first time, deeply engage with their customers, I think there's a tremendous opportunity there to you know, in addition to offering energy information, which, you know, has some appeal, it just can't be the leading thing that you go with. And this can really get the masses to engage with their energy information.
Great. Thank you, Gene. And credit goes to O Power. O Power is doing some things in a very smart way, and part of it is the contracts that they have in place, because investors look at that in terms of the recurring revenue that they can get from their business model. So working with companies as big as PG&E and others, is definitely is helping their valuation. But I'm talking about at a macro level in an economic way today. If you ask the average American how important this is, I mean, I literally pay my utility bill when I get it. Sometimes it's $100, sometimes it's $150. And, you know, I'm pretty tech savvy, so I'm thinking about how the average American is always complaining that his electricity bill is high. We will have to see how it goes. But I do believe that, and I'm glad that Paul mentioned O-Power because they worked on it in a very steady way. Another company that's doing that in the cybersecurity area is FireEye. They've also built a business model that seems to be working from a valuation perspective.
And another company that is even three times as highly valued as Nest, $3.2 billion acquisition by Google. So we're talking, and a lot of it is based on being able to capture the market with engaging systems that are very, very simple for the end user to adopt.
Great. Thank you, Gene. And now we have Andrew.
More Farrell. Just a very quick comment about engaging customers. Part of the problem that I see is the way the whole regulatory structure is set up means that not only do people not care, but it's because the system is set up so that they have instantaneous power at their disposal. It's hidden behind a light switch. They don't know what's involved there. And as a result, they expect it to be there. They have come to assume it will always be there. Other markets outside the U.S., which Erfan has probably talked about in the past, that reliability power isn't always there. So if people actually then realize that ability just to turn on lights, computers, and everything else isn't necessarily something you can take for granted, then they actually might be a little bit more conscious and aware of trying to save resources and actually contribute there to a net positive effect for the whole grid and infrastructure development.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And we have Chris with a follow-up. Chris.
Yeah,
you have any stock tips?
I have no stock tips whatsoever. Okay. I just wanted to respond to a couple of things. In one of your chats earlier, someone was talking about things other than generation services, and that's completely true. There could be a whole slew of other things around reliability, resiliency, and security that a third party or utility may want to offer customers, and those should be equally valued across the grid. But in response to what we've been talking about recently, in my opinion, we're not going to see a great uptick on customers engaging in any new technology until we get the rates fixed. And as long as we have our normal rate design, which in California at this point in time is the 4-tier increasing block rate structure, where customers get a bill at the end of the month without regard to what the actual price for delivered electricity is at a given point in time, customers don't care. Customers are not going to care until we start getting a rate design. And until we get a rate design, all the energy analytics in the world, which will be really interesting to everyone in this room, will not fly with everybody else because there's nothing they can do with it. So what if I shift my usage from 3 in the afternoon to 9 p.m.? I'm still paying the same price of electricity. There's no benefit to the customer to do that. So without the appropriate rate design in place, it's going to be very difficult to engage customers around these fun new analytic services. The gentleman from People Power brought up bundling, and I think that is in fact an opportunity where a third-party service provider is managing the customer response. They are obtaining information directly either from the meter or from the utility through what we're going to be talking about soon, the green button, and bundling that with a whole slew of other products. We see that already today with Comcast, AT&T, and ADT offering security systems plus home monitoring systems. I don't see at this point in time the utility being able to do that because of the regulatory structure, because of the lack of risk that they're so anathema to. Going to the utility, going to the commission, asking a lot of money to do bundling of services. I don't see consumer advocates going out and saying, utilities, yeah, go ahead, spend billions of dollars to go do this. when the market itself is not there. So the question around risk is, I think, a very valid question that we haven't grappled with. Now, are utility commissions and consumer advocates ready to allow utilities to bundle a whole bunch of services versus allowing a market to develop for information, which I think is what we're trying to do in California, to allow third parties to then have them bear the risk as opposed to the ratepayers?
All right, very good. So at this point, I'm going to call the town hall meeting to a close, but I'm going to have John Teeter just do a quick sound check with us. John, can you hear us?
I am hearing you. Ooh, I do hear an echo though.
Yes.
But I fully understand what Chris just said, and it's an insight that is going to drive us forward. Before we start in on the green button, I just wanted to say that there is some low-hanging fruit out there without the regulatory push, and that's probably in the built space where operational efficiencies can gain high-value feedback or payback to the portfolio managers. So we'll address that a little bit in the green button, but I do think that there are some non-policy things that even under the current rate structure can drive forward. How's the sound check?
Great, thanks. So at this point, what I'll do is I will bring this town hall meeting to a close. I'm going to end the recording, and then there'll be a new recording in about 5 to 7 minutes when we have John Teeter present, and we're going to take a little short break until then. So thank you for participating in the town hall meeting.